Mark 4:35. The calming of the storm. On the evening of that same day, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they left the crowd. The disciples got into the boat in which Jesus was already sitting, and they took him with them. Other boats were there too. Suddenly a strong wind blew up, and the waves began to spill over into the boat so that it was about to fill with water. And Jesus was in the back of the boat, sleeping with his head on a pillow. And the disciples woke him up and said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're about to die?" And Jesus stood up and commanded the wind, "Be quiet." And he said to the waves, "Be still." And the wind died down, and there was a great calm. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Why are you frightened? Have you still no faith?" But they were terribly afraid and said to one another, "Who is this man? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Every time we come to God's word, we can say, this is something that God has to say to us. Sometimes I'm thinking, this is something I haven't heard before. Sometimes I'm thinking, that is a new thought. That is good. This is not a new thought. What I thought this week was, what a great passage. We just need to hear this. I know that some of you and many people in our church family have been through all sorts of storms, turbulence, squalls, headwinds, or whatever. All of you will have been there, and some of you will get there pretty soon. I'm not a pessimistic sort of person, but the fact of the matter is life is like that. And I just want to encourage you very simply this morning to hear the gospel that's embedded in this little passage. The good news that whatever sort of thing you're in at the moment, facing up to, whether it is a big storm or, as I say, small turbulence, Jesus will bring you through safe and sound. I think you just need to hear that. This is not going to be a simplistic talk about pray to Jesus and everything lights up and it's fine. You've been there, I've heard it, and I don't believe it. But what I do believe is that what it says here is that Jesus will get you through safe and sound. Somehow, somewhere, some way. You will be okay. If that is, you cry out to him, as they did, in a complete mess of unfaith, anger, all sorts of stuff. They cry out to him, and he brings them through safe and sound. This is not just a message for people who happen to be in small boats in storms. You may well have been there, but most of you will not be in a small boat this week in a storm. It's not just a fisherman's mission sort of song to sing this. Whatever your storm in life at the moment, big or small, and I remember in the autumn being out in my 8-foot kayak in what you would have said from the prom was moderate choppiness. And I tell you, it looks like a flipping tsunami when you're out there. So whatever size storm you've got, this applies to you. After all, it's a physical problem here. They are about to drown. They're sinking, they're filling with water, and they're about to drown. It can't much more physical crisis than that. Whatever it is in terms of your health, physical well-being, practicalities of your house, your finances, your time, your whatever it is, whatever practical, physical, material crisis it will be, this is just as bad as you can get. We're about to sink and drown. But they are also in a mental, psychological crisis. Some of these disciples are fishermen. They've got a crew who they could have done without, with people like tax collectors and that sort of thing. Who wants a tax collector in a small boat in a storm? He's looking over the boat to see if you've paid, yeah. But so they are at the end of their tether. Lord, we are about to drown. The likes of Peter, they're proud men, they're professionals. It's their boat, it's their sea. They've done everything. They've rowed all the stuff. They've done the stuff with the bailing and everything they could do, and nautical they would have done. And yet they are going to drown. They're at the end of their tether. They are in despair. They're in embarrassment. They think, oh, they've had enough. So if you're anywhere like that, where you are trying hard, you're putting your best into it, you've given it your best shot, all your skills, all your patience, all your mental strength, whatever you've done, and you think, it's not going to work. Well, they're there. But they're also having a spiritual crisis because as Jesus' disciples, they find that God is doing nothing. Now, I think this is the worst crisis of the lot, really. You cry out to God and nothing happens. You ask for a message and nobody says anything. It's just there. And they're angry and they're sort of believing and not believing. And so sometimes we have, with temptation and despair, we have a spiritual crisis, a spiritual storm. Perhaps you're having that. Perhaps it's all mixed in. Anyway, this applies to it. Whatever your storm. And storms hit you everywhere it hurts. There's a mix, isn't there? Sometimes it's bigger than other things. Sometimes I know people who've gone through terrible physical pain and it seems to have not affected them spiritually at all, except them to make them stronger. Sometimes people are in the midst of great temptations, and certainly in the short term doesn't affect them physically in the slightest. There's a different mix, but those things tend to come together. So if you have some kind of issue today, this is a message for you, to cry out to the Lord, out of all your unbelief and mess. Now, you might not. I was just thinking, well, that's the obvious thing, is to cry out, but you may not do that, and you may not have done that. You may have sat in the boat getting wet and waiting to go down. You think that's ridiculous, but actually, I often do that. I do that because perhaps the generation of people I was brought up with did not have crises. Or at least you didn't let it show. And they always taught me at school not to let it show. Sort of other people let it show. Other people let their emotions out, the French. But not us. How are you? Fine. The number of you I've spoken to, the number of other people I've spoken to in my ministry who scratch the surface and are having a crisis, but they've been brought up not to say. Or perhaps brought up, worst of all, to deny it to themselves. I'm not really having a crisis. It just feels like a crisis. You cry out to the Lord, you've got to be open. There's an openness in the Bible. Here's Jesus and all the Premier Division disciples. They're having a crisis, these disciples. He's very open about that. We could be open about that with the Lord. You don't have to wear your heart on your sleeve, but be open with him this morning and say, there are some storms in my life here, even if they're small, they're still important. Or perhaps you don't cry out to him, but you sit in the bottom of the boat because really you are resentful that this is happening to you. It's unfair. There's a great sense of fairness in society today. It's not fair. Notice at the beginning of this passage, and there were other boats with him. There's lots of people in these storms, lots of boats. People have storms. It happens. This is not a punishment. This is not some great divine activity. It's just the wind. It's just meteorology. It's just a storm. It happens. Don't be so grumpy about it you won't cry out to the Lord. Or perhaps, I think you can feel this with them. I don't cry out to the Lord because I get into a victim mentality. There's nothing that can be done. What do they say? We are about to drown. We are on the receiving end of this, and we are about to be drowned by the wind and the waves. They've become victims. They've ceased to be active participants. You cry out to the Lord, you begin to be an actor again. You begin to be somebody who is engaged with sorting it, rather than there's nothing to be done. But if you're a Christian, of course, there's a bit more to it than that, you see. And they're not all in the same boat. You see, the other boats don't have Jesus in, but this boat does. I was brought up to feel that if I cried out to the Lord and nothing happened, it was probably my fault. I was brought up to feel that most of the things that went wrong in my life were my fault, and so I tend to feel guilty about them. How many Christians have been taught to feel guilty about the things that have gone wrong in their life? Now, some of them are your fault and some of them are sin, but Jesus doesn't give them the lecture in the storm. This sense of, it must be my fault, is a real disabling thing in so many Christians' lives. I dare not cry out to the Lord because I brought it all on myself. Or, of course, like them, you could say, well, we've got Jesus here and he's not doing anything. So not only do I not think it's not fair, but my whole faith system begins to disintegrate. Why isn't he doing something? The other boats are just worried about the water. These people are worried about Jesus. And you feel a deep anger that you don't let on in your home group, and you don't let on to the minister, but still deep down you feel let down by God. So not asking him. And worst of all, I suppose, is the sense that you feel sometimes that as a disciple, not only do you have all the storms of life, but you might have a few more. After all, they'd had storms when they were fishing. Now they've got this storm simply because they're on a mission trip. Jesus said, let's go over to the other side. If he hadn't said it, they wouldn't be in the storm. You think sometimes, I could do without this. It's actually more difficult being a Christian than just with the ordinary difficulties of life. I get more tempted. People give me more of a hard time. I get more tired. There are more storms. Well, yes, there are. I mean, dear old Paul, St. Paul, he had bad eyesight. He'd have had that anyway. It happened, sadly. But he also got stoned and thrown into jail and shipwrecked, and he wouldn't have had any of that had he not been a disciple. He was, even worse. You can feel grumpy about that. Set those to aside. All that sense of, passive aggression and misery and lack of faith and grumpiness and all that. Just get up and cry out to the Lord this morning. Because you know exactly where you are. And what will happen is that something will happen. What happens is that a miracle occurs here. In this case, they need a physical miracle. So they get a physical miracle. That means they get a complete change in the wind and the waves. Now that, in broad terms, is physics. That's hydrodynamics. The entropy of the situation is traumatized. Goodness knows what the quantum mechanics of it look like. But the fact of the matter is, this is physics. It all calms down. There's a major change in the whole dynamic system there. And that is a miracle. They know it's a miracle. Jesus changes the furniture. Now, this is a crucial thing. This is not to say, I pray and I'm suddenly healed. I pray and the money turns up. I pray and I've suddenly got all the time in the world. I pray and everything is suddenly forgiven. You've heard that, and it's not true. But the gospel here is you cry out to the Lord and something definitely happens. Something definitely happens. Now, we need to get to the heart of this, because if something definitely doesn't happen, there is no significance to it. I have heard so many talks on this passage, and you can read the commentators that turn this from a historical event into a parable. Well, if nothing happens, it can't be a parable. It's true that this is not just for men in small boats. It's true that this is a message for people of all sorts, like we are, with all sorts of storms in our lives, as we have. But it cannot be significant for all storms and all people if it didn't happen. It may not be just for small boats, but if it's not for small boats, it's not for us this morning. And where it says, and I read a respectable commentary, it said, we will never know really what happened on the day, but the message of Mark clearly is that Jesus will bring us safely through and give us peace. Well, if they drown on the day, how have we got any message at all? You don't cross the gain line. There is a miracle here. Jesus, at the end of the day, does not draw them to himself as they cry to him, calm them all wonderfully, and then lead them fervently in prayer as the boat goes down. This is not a Titanic situation with the band playing Near My God to Thee. But how many sort of post-Victorian platitudinous addresses have you heard of that? Personally, I want to get through. I don't want to be just blessed when I drown. And at the heart of it then, in whatever it is, there is a miracle. There is a changing of the furniture. Something happens. And it happens because Jesus can make it happen, you see. These miracles, whether they are physical miracles, and I would just say that if we are to be given peace in the middle of mental conflict or psychological conflict, or, overstress or anxiety or depression, if that is going to happen, that is just as much a miracle, in fact, probably more a miracle than dealing with some hydrodynamics in a storm. If we are going to be forgiven, that is an amazing miracle. If we're going to have spiritual restoration, that's an amazing miracle. This is not some sort of abstract thing which is somehow easier than stilling storms. But at every place, Jesus does it, first of all, because he can do it. He has the right to do it. He has the power to do it. He has the ability to do it. We are all caught with our lack of ability. Jesus doesn't have it. Has no lack. There is infinite power here. We sing about it, we believe it, but we don't necessarily trust him. They got half trust. You see, the fact that they're saying, you're not doing anything about it, it slightly implies that you could if you wanted to. He will do something because he can. And that's infinite. He also does it because he wants to. He doesn't say, I would have done this. He doesn't get up and say, okay, before we deal with a storm, why are you short of faith? Who do you think I am? Why are you asking me? It would be a very steep learning curve, but you learn quickly rather than drown, don't you? I can see this. I'd have had a lever here. I said, now, okay, folks, you want to not drown? Right, tell me, who am I? Am I the Son of God? What? Are we going to stir up our faith? When we've got that right, okay, we'll deal with the storm. No. He deals with us in grace. You come to communion this morning. He doesn't say, okay, you stand there by the projector. Don't come for the bread until you're sorted out. I'd have all my bread left. He does it because he can, and he does it because he loves us. But he also does it, and I think it's important for us in a broader sense, because it is his broader plan in your life, and for your family and friends, and for us as a church, that he should bring you safely through. You notice one of the most important bits of the passage starts at the beginning where it says, let us go over to the other side of the lake, says Jesus. You aren't going to get over there if the boat goes down. It is his purpose to go from here to there. That is the big picture. I will bring you safe and sound because that is my basic plan for your life. I have more for you to do. I will bring you through to be something else, to do something else. I will bring you all through because that is my purpose. I can do it because I have the ability. I can do it because I love you. But I've also got a big plan for you. Think of that this morning as you come to him. And if you just cry out in the midst of the mess, and you cry out half faith, half angry, half despairing, out of whatever your little storm is or your big storm is this morning, he will act out of power and love and purpose. And the result will be that you will, like them, get through safe and sound. My experience of life is that it's always been true. It is always my experience that there's always the temptation that this will be the one exception. But there are no exceptions. He always gets you through, safe and sound. But I would just say finally, to risk a pun, the disciples get through safe, but they get through more sound than they started off with. Because Jesus, ironically, of course, the sea is calm, but they're not. Which makes the whole parable business ridiculous. They're not calm at all. They're totally stirred up and terrified. And he says, you've got no faith. They're challenged by their faith, but they are moved on by this whole situation of being saved, being made safe. They are moved on. Not to ask the question, how did he do that? But to ask the crucial question, who is he? They are moved nearer to knowing Jesus as Lord, to knowing who he is. You will be made safe, but in being made safe, you will be changed. Anybody who is rescued is different. I was thinking, when trying to escape from fields in the middle of the dark, which I've occasionally done when trespassing in Somerset, I've sometimes had to make a hasty exit through a blackthorn hedge. Okay, so you finally deposited out of a blackthorn hedge into the lane and you're safe, but you're not quite the same. And you may well feel as though God has dragged you through a blackthorn hedge backwards. You are safe, but you are not the same. And if you are to say, and who is this, who even the wind and the waves obey him, you are closer to Jesus. You're closer to knowing, as from Genesis, that the only person who the winds and the waves obey is the Lord himself. So this morning, I would just encourage you to cry out to the Lord. Some of you are not having a mega crisis. You're having a good time. But you know what I mean about turbulence and about future challenges. Some of you have small storms. Some of you have squalls. Some of you have major storms. Most of you have headwinds somewhere. Just be open, just like the Bible is. We have these storms. And come this morning and cry out to the Lord in a rather mixed up sort of way. And he will do something. He will do something. Because he loves you, because he's powerful, because he has a purpose for you. And he will make you safe. He will also make you different. The band are just going to come and we're going to sing as our communion song, Faithful One So Unchanging Through the Storm. He is our rock. Let's stand and sing, shall we?